for this game project that we're developing is Last War of Hope. The game is based off of the board game of Risk, and I came up with the game because I wanted something fun to play that really showed off what we could do as a group. And Risk was just one of the main inspirations for me. I loved playing that growing up, and I wanted to make something similar to it, but I just didn't want to copy Risk in itself. So when I pitched the idea to the rest of these guys, they all agreed that it was a project that we felt we could do, and so we went from there. Now, while we were playing the game of Risk, we played with the rule set that we designed for our game, and the purpose of this exercise was to make sure that the gameplay was balanced and ready for developing. We didn't want to start coding until we knew that the game was actually going to work. To develop the game, I decided to go with the SDK Allegra. It's a multi-platform 2D game programming engine that I learned about and I messed around with, and I found that it would definitely work for this game. And with Allegra, I went and used the free Bloodshed Den C++ developments IDE, and that I found was a very simple one to use. It's had support for Allegra and many other SDKs, so I decided that and C++ was the best way to go for this game.
At every game you try to play,
my job on Risk was to create an asset list, including sound, visuals, and any variables that would be needed for the game itself, maybe scoring. Also creating all the logic for the game, how the game flow is going to go, and creating all the pseudocode, which was how each function was going to work, where it was going to be declared, and how they were going to transition to each other and how the game was going to run overall. Playing the board game, it gave us a little more edge about how the game was going to run and gave us a good feel about how we were going to play the game. And it really helped me out creating in the pseudocode, figuring out what was going to be executed first and how the functions were going to run and what exactly was going to be needed. And especially most variables that were needed as far as points and units and other things in reference to the actual game playing itself.
Hello, my name is Shayne Vandersloot. What I worked on The Last War of Hope was the sound effects and a little bit of the art. For the sound, I used SoundForge, which was a little tough at first until I got used to it. And mostly the hardest thing was just timing the sounds together. And for the art, I used Photoshop, and I already knew a little bit of that, so that wasn't too difficult. For the coat of arms, I researched a little bit. I found a website that actually had designs to create your own coat of arms, and for the colors, I basically based it off the Risk game that we used, using the yellows, the blues, and the reds that we already had inside the game.
Drake, and I composed the music for The Last War of Hope. My main inspiration for The Last War of Hope was really those old Super Nintendo RPGs. And when we were playing Risk, I was the first one to lose. I got owned, in other words, and Zach was the one who took me out. I then got to work on the music, and at first I was just walking around the room just trying to figure out a melody, and finally I sat down to Shala's theme from Final Fantasy, or from Chrono Trigger, and that really started to spark some compositions, and I finally came up with an intro song and the main battle theme, which I entitled Prelude to Battle. I hope you enjoy it.
I worked on The Last War of Hope. My main responsibilities on this particular project was to create the main character in the game, which was basically our knight. And the knight is mainly the figure that we use to resemble the armies that each player has as they move across the map. For the knight, we used a 64 by 64 pixel template, and it was particularly challenging for me because I'd never created character like this before, and the primary tool that I used for the project was Microsoft Paint and a little bit of Photoshop. Another thing about the animating that made it difficult was I never animated before, and for this particular character we needed 4 different sets of animations. We needed a front view animation, a back view, and a right side and left side animation. And the thing that made this particularly difficult with this particular project was using Microsoft Paint. It's really difficult to just flip a character around, and I didn't want to have his shield and his sword switching hands during the animations when he went from left to right. So I basically had to draw each set of animations by hand, not using any kind of copying and pasting. Well, for the exception of one thing that did make the animations better or easier to do was I took different parts of the knight and put them into separate paint files. For instance, I'd take his arm and I just had his arm in one file. I had his sword in another file. I had his head in another file. I had each leg and each hand and each body part, cloak, shield, everything all in its separate file. So that when I went to go do the animations, and I could take each of his pieces and paste them into the paint documents and then adjust them as necessary to make it look great. Another challenge was making the knight look like the same knight from each different view, because I wanted the knight to make sure when you saw him from the back side and the front side, it's not like in 3D Max where if you make a 3D character, no matter how you rotate the camera, it's always going to be the same character. Well, with using a 2D model on the 64 by 64 pixels, basically I had to hand draw each pixel to match perfectly no matter how you were looking at the knight, and that was particularly challenging as well. The symbols on the playing cards, which is also something that I worked on, it was actually fairly simple because we decided to go with a sword, a helm, and a shield for the playing card icons. And with the work that I had already done previously with the knight, it made it pretty easy. I basically just took the separate sword file, the separate shield file, the separate helm file, moved them into Photoshop, enlarged them, cleaned up the pixels, moved them back into Paint, and then fixed the coloring there. And that's how we created the card icons. And also another interesting thing that I created was the animation for our fight animation. When 2 knights come together on the map, it basically does like a Roadrunner, Wile E. Coyote dust cloud thing with arms and legs and swords and helmets and shields and feet and hands and everything sticking out of this dust cloud, and it rotates around and it looks pretty good.
Mark, the main asset there I created was the map, the overall map for gameplay. What I wanted to do with that was have something that was kind of look more like an antique map, so the colors are kind of muted, not bright primary colors, but kind of toned down. And I kind of wanted it to look like in an antique map. I put a compass rose in the corner that I made, and there's like lines of latitude and longitude going behind the continents. The hardest thing was probably just getting the layout of all of the continents with the borders and everything looking more natural, to like make it look like it could be a real map of some real place. And then when I had that done, it was mostly just little details, like I said, the latitude, longitude, and making putting borders around the continents to like look like white, lighter colored borders than the ocean, and overlaid on the continent and the ocean, I had separate textures to kind of give it a sort of a more of a crumpled paper sort of feeling to it, so that it made it look a little more antique. And then when I had all the continents laid out, I went in and found out to help Zach's programming with the positions of the continents, I found the position in pixels of the center of each of the continents and laid that out. Once I had the map done, the cards were easy. Just took a general card shape, split each of the countries on the continents apart, and put that on a card. And then I took the symbols that Dan made and overlaid that on the continent. And then, of course, everyone helped with coming up with names of the continents. Like we each had a certain amount of countries we had to name. I think we each named 6 countries or something like that. And so I just put those on top of the countries. So you have the card with the symbol, the country, and the name of it on there. And then along with that, like I just did a couple of other smaller assets. Like I made a dice animation. It was actually just one die, just kind of an off-white color with the black pips on it, and just 6 frames, one for each side of the die. And and then I made buttons like play and start and stuff like that, kind of like a stone texture with letters looked like they were kind of carved out of it.
The challenge for programming was just getting the concept of the game into code form. Dorian and I, we took all the logic and everything and fleshed it out, and we found out for every rule that we had in our board game version, we had to write at least 2 functions to handle those rules. So everything just kind of compounded as we went through the actual code logic and flow. So it was an interesting project, because this in fact was one of the biggest projects that I've actually worked on up to this point. And so yeah, it just really tested my boundaries, my strengths, and I think that it is coming along great. And the tools that I'm using, the IDE and the SDK that I'm using, those things have really helped make it a lot easier to, especially programming the graphics, and the logic and everything else is just kind of coming into play after those graphics come out. So I really think that this game will go far. It may take us a little bit longer after class or after school is over to finish it 100%, but I definitely think that this could be a game that could sell.